Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Together podcast, Insights for Delaware's Tomorrow. In each episode, we sit down with leaders from across the nation and right here in Delaware, and they explore what makes school board leadership important, which is really the mission of First Aid Educate, to elevate the importance of the role, raise awareness, and strengthen our communities. I'm your host, Julia Kelleher, Executive Director of First Aid Educate. Thank you for joining us. Today's conversation is an interesting one. We very rarely have an opportunity to talk to someone like our guest today. And it's at really the intersection of governance, democracy, and community trust. Today, you're going to have a chance to meet Stacy Bateman. She's a Utah education leader, served in the Alpine School District Board of Education, and has run multiple school board races in Utah County. Over the past several years, she's governed during a period of rapid growth, increasing political pressure, and really one of the most consequential changes that that a district could undergo. She's witnessed this and lived through it and led through it. They've divided into multiple districts. But what makes Stacy's perspective so valuable, it's not just where she serves, but when she served and what her experience reflects for school boards across the country and what we're navigating. Polarization, scrutiny, governance decisions, and you're really going to enjoy this show. I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for joining us, Stacy.
Thank you for having me.
Sure. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get interested in school board service?
I never really left public education. I went to school to be a kindergarten teacher, took a different route, but once my kids were in school, I volunteered, I coached several teams, I've been a substitute teacher, so I've really spent the majority of my time there over the last 25 years.
And the board sort of seemed like the next logical step?
It did. We were coming up on a new election cycle, and several people had asked if I would run, and I had so many years of being in schools and seeing how things really affect people on a daily basis. And so I felt like I could contribute to the great things that were already happening and also hopefully bring a new perspective that maybe wasn't being considered.
Yeah, I think bringing a new perspective is always an interesting opportunity when you have an open seat. But the other thing that you said is, multiple people encouraged you to run, right? Like, what's that like when someone really sees the leadership in you and says, hey, we could use a leader like you on the board?
It was really humbling to know that people thought that I would be a good representative of our community. I had served for years in various PTA positions as well as our school community councils. And so knowing that their confidence in me was high made it a little more of a doable thing and maybe not quite as intimidating as it could have been.
Yeah. And how many people were on the board? I mean, and we'll talk about that it's changed, but this board, when you joined the first time, what was the composition?
So 7 board members.
Okay.
Cover like 86,000 students and 9,000.
Wow. Yeah. So that's pretty big. In Delaware, the state has 142,000. So I think we've got a question of scale there. So what was it like the first time you ran? What did you think? What was the campaign like? And then did it turn out to be this thing that you expected when you got there?
So I ran during the COVID quarantine, which complicated things for a variety of reasons. There were no town halls, people weren't gathering. I had to find a way to reach people and to share what my message was. So I did a lot through social media. I would hold Facebook Lives, give people a chance to jump on, ask questions in real time. And it just became a great conversation with me and however many people decided to show up that day. Also did a lot of endorsements through social media. And I found that is where a lot of people spend their time and get their information. And so making sure that there was content every day, that we were having discussions both in that online format as well as through different posts asking questions. It was definitely not what I expected. We did not have a debate or anything. So it was just really important to find all the different avenues to reach people. And so I think when I first started, I knew that, the board was in charge of a budget and policy, and they served on committees, but not really a whole lot beyond that. So it was definitely baptism by fire while we're in the middle of a worldwide pandemic.
Yeah. So it's interesting, though, a question about the engaging over sort of these virtual tools. It changed a lot during COVID. I think there's been a swing back now that people are out. I mean, there's a lot more face-to-face, but what what's your opinion? Do you think it was helpful to have that as a tool? And, you talked about conversations with people. I mean, really being able to connect virtually does make it a little bit easier, but it's not the same as being face to face.
No, it's definitely different. At the time, it worked really well because it was really the only way to get to larger numbers of people.
Mhm,
But it was also kind of interesting to watch how, even though we were speaking through screens at each other, like that connection piece was still there.
mhm,
Once we transitioned out of that, then I was able to hold community town halls in person. I would do listening posts, just different ways to get together with employees, teachers,
mhm.
parents, and community members. So it really just showed me how important it was that we create that connection in the first place and
Yeah.
then maintain it, because
Did
people feel connected to their representative, and
Yeah.
we're able to troubleshoot things ahead of time.
Yeah, I think feeling connected is super important, but, did you continue any of those using any of those tools even when you didn't need to use them anymore? Or, is it more face to face now?
Both. So I have a pretty robust online. I have a Facebook group where people are able to be. I wanted to make sure that I created something that wasn't a public figure page where I only pushed out information, but somewhere where people could, drop some questions, have a discussion, and also for a period of time, I had it set up so that people could actually do their own post and start generating a
Mm,
conversation there. So it was definitely important to keep going. And I
yeah,
will say it was where the majority of my constituents were. So I
uh-huh.
I went where they are.
Met them there, yeah. Okay, so then you said, when you started, you knew policy and budget. They were 2 topics, okay, but what else did you find out that, this board seat now involves?
Well, everybody boards differently. So there are 7 of us on the board, and we all have different ways that we reach people. I found that I had to be able to be in front of as many employees as I could in different ways.
Mhm,
And so knowing that we could do all these great things behind closed doors, but if that wasn't being communicated clearly to our employees, they really didn't have any idea what we were doing. So making sure that
mm,
communication was going well and not necessarily depending only on the pipeline from district official communications to parents and employees. So it was
mhm.
really important that they know that I'm listening to them and the challenges that they face, and that I was taking those things into account as we made different decisions.
Yep. And did that, become easier over time? Did you sort of evolve into the role, and what sort of felt like, "Oh, I've gotta do all these things," in the very beginning kind of felt like like you said, everyone boards differently, did it start to feel like a natural way of
A
engaging?
little bit. I will say that I was very invested in our people in the first place. That's why I ran, because I saw the great
Mhm,
things that they did every day. But the longer I was in the role, the stakes got a little higher. And so
mm,
knowing that all the decisions we make impact their livelihood as employees, right? And
yeah,
their retirement, their mental health, their job satisfaction.
sure.
So being able to kind of adjust, and I will say all of my schools are a little bit different. When I started, I had 18 schools that were in my area. Now I
Uh-huh,
have 13, which is still significant,
uh-huh,
roughly 14,000 students and 3,000 employees. So just knowing what each school community needed best. Some people really like
mhm,
the smaller, more intimate conversation. Other schools
mhm.
want a whole faculty discussion. So just being able to adjust based on what each group needs.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's super important too, because, no 2 people are alike, let alone no 2 communities. How has being a board member from COVID to today, how's the role changed?
I would say we're just in the spotlight a lot more. The
Mhm,
scrutiny is pretty
mhm,
intense, and it
mhm,
never stops. It's just every day you wake up just ready for whatever comes that specific day. And maybe one of the challenges with that is hearing from people who are very upset about something, but maybe they haven't read all the actual, facts
mhm,
or the meat behind something. So being able to just kind of have a productive conversation, get down to the root of what is actually their primary concern, and then being able to move on from there.
mhm. Yeah, I think that, the conversations, that may start from a point of contention, um, sometimes, have the underpinnings of lack of information or misunderstanding. And so I think, it is very important to make sure that when we're discussing an issue that everyone's got the same set of data, that has the same information, that have the same starting point. So it seems like, and you tell me because you're in the seat, but there's a bit of kind of like an education role, right? That the board plays to
Absolutely.
help people understand.
One of the things that I did on my Facebook page is I would make sure as soon as our agendas were posted publicly that I was linking those, giving
Mm,
everybody kind of an overview of what to expect at the next board meeting,
mhm,
also giving some instructions around here's how we handle public comment. If you'd like to come do that in person, you can also submit an online public comment. And so making sure that they know ahead of time, what are we discussing? What is actually an action item? And what can you do to make sure that
mhm,
that they're communicating clearly as I make those decisions.
mhm. Yep. So it seems like the role, the environment, the skill set, everything kind of about boards over the last, what, 5 years has really kind of
Absolutely.
changed. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about kind of in Delaware, boards are nonpartisan. There's always this question of is there politics in boards? I think your experience has been unique. Certainly, it's not what we see in Delaware. But let's talk a little bit about the idea of a board being nonpartisan and how it's actually working.
One of the misconceptions I see often is that people in general think that bipartisanship and nonpartisanship are the same thing. And so,
Mm,
trying to just from a starting place of saying, when we say nonpartisan, we truly mean nonpartisan, right? Everybody
mhm,
is welcome in public education. We should all be working for the good of our schools, our students, because they're the future. So,
mhm,
starting there, several years ago, our state school board changed to a partisan election. And I would say it really intensified the way the parties got behind
mm,
the candidates and the money they put into it. And so
mm,
then it kind of puts you in a place of can you raise the money to even be in this fight?
right.
And so we actually have a bill this legislative session that would make local school board elections partisan. And one
Mm,
of the things that I've seen firsthand with that is people kind of have a over kind of generalization of what they think a partisan platform is, and that
mhm.
doesn't really connect to what's actually happening in our schools.
Yeah. So just to go back one step, the state board is a partisan election.
It is.
So, okay. And how big is that board? Like, is it
15 members for the state.
okay? And is it balanced right now, like where it is, or has it traditionally been balanced? I'm not looking for who's what, but just in general, has it leaned one way or the other?
Utah definitely leans one way. Yes.
Okay. And that's been true like consistently over the
Yes.
years. Okay. So if that bill that you mentioned were to pass, what and then no one can predict the future, right? So I'm asking you sort of in the
Right.
hypothetical, right? What might you anticipate the impact would be at the local level?
Well, we've seen already a couple of years ago, the legislature changed the filing date for these elections. It used to be in March, and then it was
Mhm,
moved to January so that
mm,
local parties could do endorsements for school board.
mhm,
Typically, and having been through that process now, there was definitely a focus on maybe more um, d- just maybe areas that were more divisive. And
mm,
so
mhm,
not truly focusing on what the job of a local school board member is. And so that's
mhm,
maybe probably the biggest part of my concern is that we're focusing on the decisions that actually get made and not a hypothetical what might be
mm.
affecting people in other states, but not actually in our own.
Interesting. Yeah. So your races, have you experienced this like organized political opposition firsthand?
I have. Going through the first time I went through, it was really just going through the local endorsement just to kind of share the platform, and interesting to see how the delegates in that room they were divided, right? There were some that
Mhm,
very much just wanted to focus on education issues and others who didn't.
mhm,
Then the second campaign, people came out, different groups came out pretty strong against me, and
mhm,
so
mhm,
we see a lot of sweeping generalizations made where people aren't necessarily looking at voting records and what decisions were made by
mhm.
individuals, and more on kind of fear mongering and trying to get people to focus there.
Yeah. So the voting records thing is interesting because we're sort of not struggling is the wrong word, but trying to find What's the right way to help Delaware kind of understand what decisions people are making? I think one of our jobs is to make sure that there's more awareness and understanding of what the board is actually doing. So conversations like this help. But when it comes to looking at a voting record, kind of, and you're going to the community and saying, "Here's how I vote." What are you trying to show them? Like, what is it your voting record sort of conveys to the public?
Well, I think we want people to understand the context behind it. So if there is just a one sentence soundbite that says, this individual voted for an intense increase in taxes, and that's meant to rile people up. And then you go back and you look at the meeting, you look at what was being proposed, and you realize it might be a net one increment, or it's $30 to the average household, right? And so really encouraging people to look beyond just that soundbite and what was it for? Did we go to pursue a bond because we need to build schools because we have far too many students that can fit? Are we trying to leverage our tax increments so that we can, reduce class size? So just really trying to say, here's what was voted on, here's the context, and here's the why. Oftentimes when people understand the why, then it makes a little more sense, and then it changes the way that they view maybe an individual vote.
Yep. And I'm sure that some of these, you're describing it very calmly, but some of these things have been tension filled, right? So how do you kind of keep the barometer under control when tensions can rise because there's such a range of opinions on an issue?
I have definitely worked on developing this skill over the years. It's in our state, if we're going to increase the tax increment, we're required to have truth in taxation, and there's public hearing with that. So that can mean an hour or 2 hours of individuals coming up and just kind of screaming and yelling about their anger. And so I had to reframe this and say, why do they feel so strongly about this? And at the end of the day, everybody's just trying to take care of what they have, right? So if you are on a fixed income and you don't qualify for an abatement, that's challenging. If you don't have kids in school, that's a different conversation to have. And so just trying to explain that, not everybody that pays taxes has kids in school, but we should all be invested in a strong school system because this is the community that we live in. So it's definitely evolved over the years, and genuinely, once you start talking to someone and you understand the root of their cause, it makes it easier to have a productive conversation.
Yeah, I think with that, the point about everyone should be invested in public education. I mean, it is different if you have kids or you don't have kids in the school system. But at the end of the day, if the public education fails, there's a whole series of downstream consequences, right, for society, for communities. So.
Absolutely. And I think just remembering, before I had children, I paid taxes so that other kids would have a good education. And when I was growing up, someone paid for me. And so in a lot of ways, public ed is the center of all our communities, and the degree to which we support and invest in it very much impacts our daily lives.
Yeah. So let's flip this now. Like, how engaged are people? I mean, okay, so people come and there's an issue and everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people come to speak, but the people we hear from when they're speaking might not always represent the majority voice. They're just the people who organize themselves to get there to share their opinion. What does it look like if we looked at voter turnout? I mean, we have a huge challenge in Delaware of trying to raise this number and making sure that everyone feels invested in participating in the decision making around who's in that seat of authority. What's it like for you?
Our voter turnout is incredibly low. When we hit 33%, that was the highest that we had seen in years. And that was just 33% of registered voters, right? So there have been several campaigns just to even help people register to vote. I can't tell you how many people I talked with in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they had never voted before. And so just trying to encourage them to be involved in the process, and also saying, when you vote on this, you're determining who is going to make these decisions. And so I think it's also important that people understand your local elections, they impact your daily life more than some of the, national landscape. Also found that in terms of people that are well mobilized, the majority of the loudest people were not the majority of the whole of my constituents. So So that's a definite balance, because if people see, that 90% of your public comments all leaned one way, but they don't know all of the people that reached out via phone call or email or, set up a meeting to talk. So you don't really get that full balance. So,
Yeah.
I will say our high school teachers, government and citizenship is a required class in Utah, and they have done a phenomenal job to help students be ready to vote when, they're able to. And I think that education focus, so that they understand how it impacts them, how to register to vote, how you get your ballot. That's one of the things that I think is going to turn things around for us. I don't know that we're going to see a huge increase. Everybody's busy. I hear that a lot. When I'm busy, I don't have time to vet candidates. And then something goes wrong, and then they realize, oh, maybe I should have paid a little more attention to this.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think they're fundamental questions about legitimacy and the representation and trust, really, in government. So let's look at this issue of the division of the district. This is a fundamental thing that happened. Kind of set the stage for the audience, right? What was it like, and what was the event that precipitated?
So we have looked at a district reconfiguration for several years in a row. Some of the criteria that we had said would, trigger moving this forward was if we were no longer able to pass a general obligation bond, or if our test scores were low. So we had several different criteria. And while our students were performing relatively well, when our bond failed, that was, I would say, the biggest catalyst for we need to do something a little differently. Our district is really, so there's 3 areas now, but there were really kind of 2, the East and the West. East was facing declining enrollment. West was dealing with unprecedented growth. And so we had some schools that had much lower, maybe 300-400 kids enrollment. And then we had other schools that had 1,000 to 1,200. And so being able to meet those individual needs was becoming challenging. And so after a period of just different things going maybe in ways we wouldn't have hoped, it became clear that if we were going to take care of people well, that we needed to start this process. So we had hired an out-of-state firm to kind of come and do a feasibility study, and they presented several different options. And so what was really important to us, let me speak for myself, was that whatever we did at this time was going to be something that would not have to be done again in 5 or 10 or 20 years. We were really trying to come up with the best option where this is going to, work for everybody moving forward. So just being able to, whether it's the distribution of Title I funds, the class size, the different resources, we needed to do a better job of taking care of people.
Yep. Yeah. I think 2 things that I hear there, sort of the changing conditions required moving in a particular direction, but the board had the challenge of understanding the immediate situation, but conceptualizing a path forward that considered the short, medium, and long term, because you need a durable solution. You don't want to put people through this time and time again. Did I hear that right?
Yes. And probably one of the most important things to understand was when I first started on the board, 2 of us represented 48% of the district, and 5 board members represented the other 52%. With the 2020 census, that shifted a little, and we became 3 and 4 board members, but it was just incredibly imbalanced, and feeling like we were doing everything we could to get to all the people we could, but that was a lot of people to represent.
Right.
And you only have so many hours in a day.
So that in that regard, it makes a lot of sense. What's the process been like to sort of divide up a system? I mean, I can't imagine that that's easy.
So a lot of things are taken care of in code. About 20 years ago, there was another school district in the state that split, and there were a lot of bumps in that, and that was not quite a good experience for the people involved. So we had several legislators that got together and worked with our school board members and saying, how can we write good code? So not just for our district, but any district after us that decided they also wanted to do this, that would work for them. So things were taken care of, how the buses are distributed, which if a building is in an area, it stays in that building. So we're not fighting over, the value of a property in that way. So several of those things are already taken care of for us. And then there's a different group of things that will be addressed in negotiations. So new school board members were elected this past November, and we are currently in the process of working through that transition and what it looks like. So we're hoping for a seamless and positive experience for our employees and our families.
Yeah, well, it's really admirable that you can put, the good of the community first. That really shines through in everything you're saying. I mean, you clearly have assumed this responsibility on a personal and a professional and a community leader level, right? And I think that's really admirable. And not easy, not easy. I mean, I'm sure that you're describing it and very clearly, but I'm sure that there's a lot of discussions, a lot of confusion, a lot of different points of view throughout all of this process.
It's definitely an intense process. And I will say there were people on both sides. I had teachers who very much supported this and were looking at this like this was now going to be an opportunity to breathe, and then I had teachers who were very personally hurt that we would try to break up this district, and so, and knowing that I respect and admire so many of these people. So it's definitely become personal and, just trying to say, hey, we all want to move in the same direction here. So, let's come together and work through this, because ultimately, I really do believe that it's going to be a very positive thing for our communities.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope so. So it has been a great conversation. I could ask you, hundreds more questions, but I want to close on this. Sort of what do you wish people really understood about a board? If you could say, wow, this boards really can do this, and that should give us hope for the future. What should people understand?
I think the first thing to understand is we are local. We live in this community. The investment and ownership we feel is strong and significant. Also, just learning basics of what is in our purview, right? And so sometimes it's a local school board, sometimes it's a state school board, sometimes it's the Department of Transportation. But once people understand what local school boards can do and how important their input is, that's a game changer. And so there's several people who we maybe started out where they were in a really upset place. And as we've kind of worked through things, they become some of my most trusted constituents and who I go to for, their pulse on things and how they're seeing things. So sometimes there's this narrative that it doesn't matter what people do or, how involved they are. And that, is so, it couldn't be farther from the truth, right? So just truly understanding that if you live in this community, whether you have students or not, you have access to an elected official. Please use that access. There's a variety of different avenues to reach people with all the technology and social media. So, getting in more conversations, starting dialogues. A lot of times we don't end where we start, right? But as different people come to the table, start sharing their perspective, that's when we're better leaders, and it's reflected in our governance.
For sure. That's a fantastic close. A lot of brilliance and expertise in what you've shared. Thank you. I think, this idea of highlighting for the audience, what I'm taking away, right, is that, you think it's one thing when you get started, it's policy and it's budget, but really it's so much more than that. And staying connected to the community and understanding what you mentioned about the impact on the employees, the decisions that the board makes really does have direct implications for the people who work for the district, navigating this new level of scrutiny that boards are facing and trying to find a way to keep it nonpartisan. I think those are really, really challenging changes, and when politics affects education, I don't know that that's always getting us to the best answer, but you've done a great job navigating what you've done. And I appreciate you and applaud your leadership and your commitment to community and really the encouragement that you give in that closing of reminding people that there is a way to engage and that they can be part of the solution.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for sharing this information. I think that the more people that hear the message that being involved matters, that's when kids win.
Couldn't agree more. To our listeners, thank you for joining us today. If you're looking for information on the topics we covered today or others, please visit the Knowledge Hub. We look forward to seeing you next time.